Today we get started wiring on the OBS, and the first thing to do is basically pull all the harness apart for that factory ECU and get all that stuff drug out so I can start sorting through it. Thought I'd go and show you this stuff right away. These are some of the stuff I use. This is from, I think I just get them from Amazon, which I've got some other parts mixed in here, but I use these crimp and seal connectors where you just squeeze them like you do these, heat them with a heat gun, and they seal themselves to the wire. Also, I use all types of loom like this expanded loom here, which is kind of like Chinese finger cuff stuff you can get on Amazon in all different sizes. I got a couple of sizes of what's called split loom, which looks more like factory harness stuff. This is kind of some larger size, smaller size, and medium size. Again, just check on Amazon for split loom. That stuff's super handy to have. And always, 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 you'll see me use hockey tape, because again, it's kind of what they use from the factory. I'm not really sure exactly what GM's idea was with sealing this wiring off at the bulkhead. Like, come up with another fitting and fill it full of wax or silicone or something? I don't know. A lot of this cleaned up now, and that tore me up as much as I tore it up, I think, getting that connector all cleaned out from the wax. Tried to separate things like the AC system from the body module. Got rid of all the connections for the ECM. And the one thing I wanted to make sure of was keeping the temp sensor wire, which I think comes from the driver's side over there, the oil pressure sensor that goes to the gauge, and of course your alternator exciter wire. And then its supply line comes up here to this bulkhead connector. That's your fuel pump relay, and then that is a fuse for the fuel pump on the output. I know this looks awful rudimentary and things, but I wanted to get a test so I understand fully what we need to do to get power to our fuel pump using the stock harness that goes to the back, which I've got it pulled out, and it's right here with this test light in it. I've put ground to the block and to this harness, including this relay. And then, of course, it's got power up here on this strip. So I look up everything. This comes from the ECM. This is a dark green and white, according to everything that I've read, that feeds that back left corner, if you're looking at it, of this relay. And the oil pressure switch, which is in line here, it's just cut loose. It's supposed to get power on one side. And from what I can tell, it ties to power output on the other. So I would think that it's like an interrupt. So if it recognizes no oil pressure, it would shut off the fuel pump. Anyway, this is the feed line. This is the output line. It goes through the relay. I'm gonna hook this up to the positive side of our battery and see if we get any clicky clacky and light shiny. Yeah, now that I know this, I can clean this up. I can get rid of some of this goop and just tie the orange wire into the power supply for the relay, and then label this as fuel pump switch. The problem is when you turn on the key, if this is wired to the ignition on run and crank, it'll have the fuel pump the whole time. So if you have your key turned on, it won't let just the fuel pump prime and then stop. It'll sit there and continue to run. So that's really not ideal. You can put a module in there that recognizes tax signal. So if it stops seeing RPM, it'll shut the pump off. Probably a good idea to get that if you want to spend a little bit of extra money. I may just for now at least get it cranked and running, make sure everything works. And I would kind of like to be able to just turn the key on and then come out here and adjust fuel pressure on the regulator with the gauge instead of having to have the engine running. That might be a kind of a neat trick. Ridiculously windy outside, so not going to get a lot of good filming in, but I'll give you some updates. I got some more of the connectors, these Alex Techs. That's the split loom that I talked about earlier. Got some more of that in, as well as some wiring, because this 35-year-old truck has certainly undergone some heat cycles and some damage to some of the wiring insulation. Thought some of you might find it helpful. This wiring, which comes from one side here, from your column direction, if you will. I think this So that is your oil pressure sensor wire. Again, it comes from the driver's side. This twisted wire here is for your speedometer. So that comes down, runs down the back of the engine. These three wires come from the passenger side, and they run your lock-up torque converter switch. So I've got them labeled. They were originally hooked up to the ECU for these two wires at least. I don't know if you guys can tell the colors, but you'll have to trace them anyway, because there's multiple wires that, to me, have very similar colors. Then the third wire that goes to that torque converter plugs into your body module. And so I've got it labeled here. You can kind of see its location. Also, I've labeled this wire that comes from the fuel pump relay, this red and white, which goes to the body control. So I'm not sure what signal happens there. And then labeled that fuel pump signal wire, AC compressor. You'll just really have to disassemble that and start tracing it and getting rid of the stuff that just runs the fuel injection and the distributor wiring on this engine. Also, there's some redundancy for your coolant temp sensor. And then there's that, like we mentioned earlier, the oil pressure switch, which I thought would shut the fuel pump off, but I don't think I understand the science behind that. Cleaned up this harness that goes back to the fuel pump and the tail lights, and also tied in trailer 4-flat wiring to the end of that with those crimp and seal connectors. I'm gonna clean up these transmission wires a little bit more and put them in a loom and run those back. So again, this is basically your tail lights and everything come from this portion here, as well as the fuel pump wires come from the relay over there. And that's what this little connector is right there. That's your ground and power for the fuel pump. These are the factory fuel lines and vent line. I've got those things cleaned up. Also have a new filter to put in there. I'm gonna go ahead and get it fastened up in the frame with that wiring harness. It's all cleaned up now, and then we can put our new fuel tank in, which was I think $131 and change on Summit. It is oversized, so you may pay a little bit of shipping. I can't remember now. It comes with the lock ring and the O-ring. Finished squaring up a bunch of the cable management here. Again, this is the factory harness. That's your oil pressure sender, and I did verify it with my gauge. So I did order a new one of those as well, so I've got to get an adapter to put the 89 oil pressure sending unit into this LS. Let's see, this is stubbed out for your windshield wiper motor. This is the harness that will go back on the transmission for the torque converter and the speedometer. This will come up front because your alternator, that's your power output. That's the exciter wire, and I did verify this is the wire that's on when the key is on the run position, and you'll need that to tell the alternator to send a charge. And this is a coolant temp sensor. It's just a little slip-on or clip-on jobby like so. I've got one of those on the way from Classic Instruments. They actually make a coolant temp sensor that threads into these LS motors and will run like an old school analog gauge. So that's pretty dope. This output goes to the AC connections, which is that guy and that guy. Then this is a ground. I shortened it a lot because it was forever long. And it runs back into the chassis. It's also tied to the ground up here. So I will utilize it to run the MSD box inside there. This is your crank signal wire from your ignition switch. So, man, this is having a terrible time focusing. That is stubbed out, and I will run it down the back and put some heat protective coating on this to run the starter. And of course you have your battery cables here. This one, I will put some heat protective coating and go down there to the starter. Then this thin wire is the one that basically, I still have this loose, but it will tie in right here. That's factory. That's where the charge from the alternator also is tied. So, which is this one. So basically, it sends power from an alternator. This will go out and charge the battery. I did get rid of a few of these things. Like if you look, this is that fuse for the fuel pump. And I just got rid of everything else that was hooked up. So this is the switched wire from the solenoid, and this is the output to the fuel pump itself, and got rid of everything else that was connected to that. And which was that oil pressure switch that was in line to this. I got rid of it and put those crimp and seal connectors. Just tidy this stuff in here up quite a bit. Also, this is the wiring for the little hose, the light that's inside this fender that's on a reel. So I just went ahead and put some of this sleeve over the top of it and have it wound up. And then of course your hood light is still there. Anyway, that's all tidied up. We've got this harness to go back into the behind the dash, and we'll do business in there. We'll have to get the MSD box in there and wired, and those outputs coming out here. Also, I kind of did a cool thing here. I was really struggling with where to run the transmission cooler lines. So I ended up just taking it and feeding it through the frame rail. And I did put some of this split loom on it, which kind of helps some abrasion. And for now, I've just got this oil cooler hanging so we can do our test fires and such, and then it'll mount on front of the condenser once all that's done. And inside here, I will, at some point, tie it up like whenever I do the lowering kit. And then underneath, I put a little heat protection sleeves on those 2 lines and tied them up against that heat shield on the bottom of the cab with stainless zip tie. Don't use plastic on those high temp surfaces like that. I did get the fuel tank mounted in here. You guys saw it was ready to go earlier. I had to get some little rubber black padding to put on the top side of the mount, or on the top side of the tank where the mounts are. And just to show you guys what was inside the old fuel tank, that's 35 years of use, and you just don't really want to risk a bunch of that stuff finding its way to the sock on the bottom of your fuel pump and running out of fuel. And now to the fuel system. I've got everything laid out so we can go over the stuff that I purchased, and I'll update this video obviously when we probably have to run somewhere like 918 Motorsports to buy more stuff. So keeping in mind, this is for us running a carburetor. Now there's a couple things you're gonna probably use. These from ICT Billet, these are the 2 part numbers that you will need. They basically make adapters that go from, and there's O-rings that come for these, the factory braided stainless lines from your OBS. It'll convert them to 6AN, which 6AN is plenty big enough for 500 or 600 horsepower, I think, on gasoline for fuel injection. And it's good for way more than that with a carbureted application because you're only running like 5 PSI. So all you have to do is concern yourself with volume. So you're gonna need these 2 guys if you're gonna reuse any of your factory fuel system or fuel lines, which we are. These fittings, I like using this push lock style fuel lines instead of building AN fittings. I have these are just specific to the way that I want to plumb it to this regulator, which is the part number here. This comes with a carbureted pressure spring in it, but if you ever were to utilize it in fuel injection, you can change this spring out. Comes with a mounting bracket and the hardware. This one is actually upgradable too, so if you ever run boost, that's going to be there to adjust your pressure based on boost. And then these are a couple parts I think I bought from Summit. These 2 also, they converted the O-ring fittings, which is what this thing is cut for, and convert them to 6AN so we can run our fuel lines. And of course, these will go on here and convert it to a hose barb for hose. I'm sure that's clear as mud. This is a bracket for running like the factory fuel pedal and your kick down, since we're running that $700 R4, and it's made for a Holley. You can see they put that little notch right there so it can drop in and connect. Also, this has to be purchased. Oh yeah, part number on that guy, and then part number from Summit. This is way cheaper. I think Holley's is like 50 bucks or something crazy. This is what you need to bolt on the linkage so you can hook your TV cable from your transmission and make adjustments to that. Fuel pump, this is the factory hanger setup. I thought it's funny because someone was looking at my truck who's probably watching this video now and they thought, oh, someone already put a brand new fuel sender. I was like, don't be fooled just because the chrome's nice and shiny. It just is good at corrosion resistance, because this is what it looked inside, which I showed you guys inside the fuel tank not too long ago, so it was kind of grody. Anyway, this is the factory setup. You can buy new ones of these if you don't want to stress whether or not your sender is accurate or not, which this truck still worked fine. Basically, I'm just going to replace this factory fuel pump with this Walbro. This is the Walbro part number. I get it from 918 Motorsports, but there's lots of options on this. It's 255 liter per hour pump, which is more than sufficient, again, for what we're trying to do with a carburetor. If you're making big giant horsepower in an E85, you might step up your fuel pump, but we don't really have a need for that. It's kind of nice because it can draw the same amperage that's being supplied to this factory pump. You'll just need to buy the sock, which kind of a pre-filter that goes on the bottom, and then you'll want this harness or pigtail adapter so you can tie this red and black into this connector, and it'll snap in to the top of your Walbro pump. On the carburetor itself, these are assemblies that I see everywhere. This one's got like Summit branded on it, but you buy it already ready to go. I saw them on the shelf at 918 Motorsports. I keep saying that. Anyway, you're welcome, Jeff. So anyway, you can just buy this kit in different colors or black or whatnot. This already came on the carb, as you guys probably saw in the second video in this series. I just had to switch which side because they were fueling it from the front. I had to have this component, I think I got it from Summit, so I can convert that to 6AN like the rest of our fuel system. So this is a Wix fuel filter. It's just a factory OBS replacement filter, which is also going to be nice. By reusing the OBS fuel lines will allow you to just get a fuel filter anywhere, any part store. They'll be on the shelf if you're out and about. The valve covers and coil packs installed. I'm gonna get these headers buttoned up. I'm kind of waiting for this last coolant temp sensor, just in case it's too close to the header flange, to get it tightened up. There's the stock LS replacement temp sensor that will plug in to our MSD box, and I'm working on a dipstick tube there. That's the X-Pipe Speed Engineering. That's part number right there. Bolts up to their long tube headers. So on this MSD box, I think we talked about it briefly, it's that 6014. And it comes with a couple of main harnesses. This is one that goes from the box to both of your coil harnesses, and then a ground on the back of each head. Goes to that coolant temp sensor, which is, like I said, the factory LS1 style. Then it has a power and ground, so this should just be power on, ignition on and crank position, run and crank, I guess. The other harness goes between the MSD box and a short harness that connects the crank to the crank and the cam sensor, which I already have those plugged in on the back side of that engine, because you can't put the starter on until you've done the crank position sensor. So it'll plug into those here. Also, it has these outputs, which are pretty handy. So there's your TAC output, because you don't have a distributor anymore since you've gone this route. So if you're running a TAC, this gray wire tells it what to do. Blue wire is your two-step, so you can set a maximum RPM level that when this recognizes 12 volt positive, it will only allow the ignition to reach that number of RPMs that you've got predetermined. Otherwise, it goes to the standard rev limiter. The pink wire is for timing retard. So if you have nitrous or something like that, which we will have, when you arm your nitrous, send 12 volts to this, and it will back your timing off based on predetermined program that you've done on your laptop with their free software. So you don't melt your engine down, you can back the timing off during spray. You know, it just dawned on me that maybe instead of testing this fuel system with the carburetor bolted on the engine, why don't we test it not bolted on the engine? So if a float sticks or something crazy happens, it doesn't fill this thing full of fuel. We're gonna do it like this and see what happens. I'll get a wrench ready so we can adjust that fuel pressure. Oh, here goes nothing. Literally nothing. Forgot to put ignition power to that fuel pump relay. Now maybe here goes something. That's definitely way more fuel pressure than it should be. I've got this thing backed out a crazy amount and not sure. I can't help but think there's some restriction in this return. I did blow through it with my air compressor. I may check it again though. Yeah, so it appears that this return line is not flowing enough back to the tank. So of course every PSI your return line is restricting, it's going to create another PSI at your gauge. So I ran this one, I just put this hose fitting and ran it into a gas tank, so there's almost no restriction there. We'll try this again. Nice and quiet too. Yeah, so now we can, there we go. Yeah, I can really turn it down. That's 4. Low. It's about as low as it'll get. So yeah, 4.5, 5. Didn't change the spring or anything. Here's what the return looks like. So we're gonna need to run this larger return back to the fuel tank. It's getting late on a Sunday evening, it's been rainy, and I got the MSD stuff all hooked up, the things that I showed you. The grounds are all in there, fuel pressure's good as you guys saw. Bolted the carb back down, hooked up the throttle cable. I don't know, by the way, these are Speed Engineering's plug wires and boots. I guess we didn't go over those. The battery is charging to make sure it's topped off. Since there's no alternator, this thing will be running 100% off the battery, but being a yellow top, it's kind of a starting and deep cycle hybrid, so it ought to be able to run the motor for a few minutes. Also, one little detail, I did put some water in the block there. I just don't like it being completely dry. A little bit of water between the cylinders will help insulate it somewhat. I'll probably have to pump it a few times to get fuel from the carb all the way into those cylinders, and be ready to do transmission fluid. So, oh, guess I can show you guys in here. That's all just kind of laying there on the floor until we make beautiful sounds. Today's update after no sleep last night. You guys feel me on that? So I knew this engine worked with that ignition box when we bought the car. I know I've got the fuel pressure right, so that's good. The carburetor's not been touched. The coils and the plug wires are what I did replace, and the coil harnesses were from Speedway. Speed Engineering, I'm sorry. Start eliminating the changes. This is the coil harnesses that were on it with the car that we bought. So we'll try this first. Process of elimination. I guess I could go ask the guy, a friend of mine that I bought this from, if I can have those old coils just to at least try. But this thing is set to auto sense coils, so you shouldn't have to choose which ones. Or the dwell time. So if you see in our settings, the coils are set to auto. This is a custom one. Let's see, we'll go custom one timing table. It's pretty conservative. And I'm monitoring these items. So I know my coolant temp sensor's picking up. I'll tell you one thing I don't love is, well, that's reading 30 and just stuck there for some reason. Anyway, let's give her a whirl. as they say. So maybe those cheap Speedway engineering, or speed engineering, I'm sorry, Speedway. Speed engineering coil harnesses maybe not no buenos. I guess I can look into them, take the tape off and see what's up. They're like 20 bucks a piece, so I guess you get what you pay for. I'm gonna end this video here because I know it's gotta be forever long at this point, which is a pretty cool song. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.